the following two videos, we're going to be learning about a pair of regulatory hormones that are responsible for controlling the amount of water and salt that are reabsorbed from the urine back into circulation. From the structure that we see here, we can see the first of our hormones is steroid-based, from which we get the name aldosterone, due to the fact that this is a testosterone derivative, as are the case of many steroid-based hormones. And aldosterone is a hormone that is responsible for regulating the concentration of Na+ that is reabsorbed from urine back into circulation in the blood. Now, when it comes to understanding aldosterone, the first thing that we need to learn are the set of environmental stimuli that can lead to an increase in aldosterone production, as what aldosterone does, the effects that it causes, directly affect and respond to these stimuli, the first of which is an abnormally low blood pressure. Now, your body has the ability to detect whether it has a high or low blood pressure from a series of sensory neurons that we find within the arteries, which are what we call pressure sensors, which again detect whether there is too much water. In that event, more water would mean that we have a higher blood pressure, but in this case, the sensors are particularly sensitive towards a low blood pressure, meaning that our blood volume is lacking in water, which gives us a hint about what aldosterone may do. Another major stimulus is the regulatory hormone that is used in the glomerulus in order to trigger pressure filtration, which is the hormone angiotensin. So as we can see from the name, angio referring to blood vessels and tensin being a shortening of the word tension, we remember that angiotensin is the hormone that causes the constriction of the capillaries in the glomerulus, thereby forcing out fluid from the blood and becoming the filtrate in the Bowman's capsule. Now, the strongest stimulation will not make sense on its own, but a high concentration of potassium ions within blood is a very strong stimulus that triggers the production of aldosterone, as is having a low or acidic pH in the blood, which is a condition that we call plasma acidosis, meaning too much acid being present in blood. And the significance of these two as being stimuli will make more sense when we look at the actual function of aldosterone. So if we look at the mechanism of action, we're going to use probably the most easy to understand visually of our possible stimuli, that being the regulatory hormone angiotensin binding to a receptor protein that we find on the glands that are responsible for aldosterone production, which are also the same glands responsible for producing adrenaline, the adrenal glands. And it's possible that this is the location of aldosterone production because the adrenal glands are located directly above the kidneys, which means that transporting aldosterone from the adrenal glands to the kidneys via the blood is relatively easy to do, and that's exactly what happens. So once aldosterone has traveled from the adrenal glands to the blood, it is going to bind to specific receptor proteins that we find on the surface of cells of the collecting duct. And again, the significance of this is because the collecting duct is the final location where the balance between salt and water in the urine and blood is able to be regulated. So think of the collecting duct as the last available opportunity to balance between the two. Now, in terms of the geography here, remember that aldosterone is traveling through circulation, meaning that our blood will be here. These are the cells that make up the wall of the collecting duct, which we can indicate here, meaning that the inside of the collecting duct, what we call the lumen, is here. Now, here is where we can gain a little bit of insight as to why high potassium concentration in the blood is such a strong stimulus for aldosterone. Now, aldosterone regulates the movement of sodium from the collecting duct into the blood, and one way that this is possible is that aldosterone actually triggers cells within the collecting duct to produce sodium-potassium pump proteins, and therefore increasing the ability to transport potassium out of the blood and sodium out of the collecting duct. And as we have seen in the nervous system, each sodium-potassium pump is able to transport 3 sodium ions out of the nephron, which is happening here, while simultaneously transporting 2 potassium ions from the blood into the nephron like this. So the result of this is that the concentration of potassium in our blood is going to decrease as it gets transported from the blood into the nephron like this, while simultaneously the concentration of sodium inside of the collecting duct is going to decrease, resulting in a concentration of sodium increase within the blood. And now that this particular stimulus, the high concentration of potassium inside of the blood, is no longer present because we transported it now into the filtrate in the collecting duct, our stimulus, if it was indeed a high concentration of potassium in the blood, is no longer present, thereby initiating negative feedback to shut down the production of aldosterone. Now, what effect does this actually have on urine? Well, as a consequence of transporting a high concentration of potassium into the blood, we are making the blood more hypertonic compared to the urine because we are increasing the solute concentration. Now, therefore, if our blood is hypertonic, water is going to osmose into our blood in order to counteract the effects of this high concentration of sodium, and therefore, if more water enters our blood, if we have a greater blood volume, that means that our blood pressure, the force exerted by the movement of water, is going to increase. And this is why low blood pressure is an important stimulus, because sensing that our blood volume doesn't have enough water, one way to rectify this problem is to make the blood temporarily hypertonic, thereby creating the conditions that will allow more water to osmose in, thereby rectifying the problem with blood pressure. In the second video in this series, we're going to look at the counterpart hormone to aldosterone that primarily regulates the flow of water in and out of the urine and the blood.